You really think we're going to bail you out? Bethany, you made your bed. Now lie in it. My mother's words hung in the air like poison, and I could hear my sister Melanie laughing in the background. I was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store in Kansas City, Missouri, holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was a cold November afternoon, and I had just asked my family for help, something I swore I would never do. My name is Bethany, and I was 30 years old when my world fell apart. 6 months earlier, my husband Ralph had walked out on me, leaving behind divorce papers and a mountain of debt I didn't know existed. We had been married for 5 years, and I thought we were building a life together. Turns out, Ralph had been building something else entirely. A gambling addiction that drained our savings and maxed out every credit card we had. When I discovered the truth, Ralph was already gone. He left me with nothing but bills, a rental apartment I could barely afford, and the clothes on my back. I had been working as an administrative assistant at a small accounting firm, making just enough to get by when things were stable. But now, with Ralph's debts in my name and no safety net, I was drowning. That's why I called my mother. "Mom, I'm not asking for much," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just enough to help me get through the next few months until I can figure things out. I'll pay you back, I promise." "Bethany, we've already done enough for you," my mother replied, her tone sharp and dismissive. "We paid for your wedding, remember? That was $20,000 we'll never see again. And now you want more?" I felt my stomach twist. The wedding had been their idea. The big venue, the expensive flowers, the photographer who charged more than my monthly rent. I had wanted something small. But my mother insisted it had to be perfect. Perfect for who? I wondered now. "That was different," I said quietly. "This is an emergency. Ralph left me with nothing." "Then maybe you should have been smarter about who you married," my mother snapped. "We're not a bank, Bethany. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. In the background, I heard Melanie's voice again, mocking and cruel. Tell her to get a second job. Or maybe she should have thought about that before she let Ralph walk all over her. My sister had always been like this. Growing up, Melanie was the golden child. Prettier, smarter, more successful in our parents' eyes. She had married a wealthy man named Gregory, a real estate developer who spoiled her with vacations and designer handbags. Melanie never struggled a day in her life, and she loved reminding me of that fact. "I have to go," my mother said abruptly. "We're about to sit down for dinner. Good luck, Bethany. I hope you figure it out." The line went dead, and I stood there in the cold, staring at my phone. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had asked for help, and they had laughed at me. My own family had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment and made a decision. I would survive this, and I would do it on my own. I didn't need my mother's money or Melanie's pity. I would rebuild my life from the ground up, and one day, they would regret ever doubting me. I started by taking on a second job, waitressing at a diner on weekends. The work was exhausting, but the tips helped me keep my head above water. I also enrolled in online courses to improve my skills, hoping to land a better paying job. Every spare dollar I earned went toward paying off Ralph's debts and saving for a future I couldn't yet see, but refused to give up on. During those early months, I learned what it meant to be truly alone. My friends had drifted away after the divorce, either because they sided with Ralph or because they didn't know how to handle my situation. My family had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me, so I buried myself in work and survival, one day at a time. But even in those dark moments, I felt something stirring inside me, a quiet determination that refused to be extinguished. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to thrive. And when I did, I would make sure my family saw exactly what they had thrown away. 6 years later, I was standing at the gates of my own property, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Kansas City that I had purchased with the money I earned from building a successful consulting business. I had clawed my way out of poverty, taught myself everything I needed to know about business and finance, and turned my pain into power. And now, my family was back. They were standing at my gate, asking for something they had no right to ask for. But this time, I wasn't the desperate woman begging for help. This time, I held all the cards. The years between 30 and 36 had been a blur of hard work, sacrifice, and relentless focus. After that phone call with my mother, I made a promise to myself. I would never ask anyone for help again. Instead, I would become the kind of person who didn't need it. At first, progress was slow. Between my administrative job and waitressing shifts, I barely had time to sleep. But I used every spare moment to educate myself. I read books on business, watched tutorials on marketing, and studied successful entrepreneurs who had started with nothing. I became obsessed with the idea of creating something of my own, something no one could take away from me. One night, while scrolling through job postings, I stumbled across an opportunity that changed everything. A small startup company was looking for someone to help them organize their finances and streamline their operations. The pay wasn't great, but they were willing to teach me the ins and outs of running a business. I applied immediately, and to my surprise, they hired me. Working at the startup was like drinking from a fire hose. I learned about budgeting, client management, contract negotiations, and scaling operations. The owner, a woman named Patricia, saw potential in me and gave me more responsibility than I probably deserved at the time. She taught me how to think strategically, how to anticipate problems before they happened, and how to turn a struggling business into a profitable one. Within 2 years, the company had tripled its revenue, and I had become Patricia's right hand. She credited me with much of the success, and when she decided to retire, she offered to sell me a stake in the company. I didn't have the money up front, but Patricia believed in me enough to set up a payment plan. It was a risk, but it was one I was willing to take. That decision changed my life. By the time I turned 33, I had bought out Patricia completely and rebranded the company under my own name. I shifted our focus to consulting, helping small businesses optimize their operations and increase profitability. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. The business grew faster than I ever imagined. Clients referred their friends, and soon I was hiring employees to keep up with demand. I moved out of my cramped apartment and into a modest house. Then, as the business continued to expand, I upgraded again, this time to a property that felt almost too good to be true. It was a 4-acre estate on the outskirts of Kansas City, surrounded by trees and privacy. The house itself was beautiful, modern but warm, with large windows that let in natural light, and a kitchen I had only dreamed of owning. There was a guest house on the property, a pool, and even a small garden where I could grow vegetables. When I signed the papers, I sat in my new living room and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I couldn't believe how far I had come. 6 years earlier, I had been begging my mother for a few $100s. Now I owned a piece of land worth more than anything my family had ever had. But I didn't tell them. I didn't call my mother or send pictures to Melanie. I wanted to enjoy my success without their judgment or jealousy. For years, I kept my life private, building my business and focusing on my own happiness. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. I was in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "Bethany, there's someone at the gate. They say they're family." My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to my family in over 5 years. After that phone call, I had cut off all contact. I didn't block their numbers, but I stopped answering when they called. Eventually, they stopped trying. "Who is it?" I asked. "A woman named Melanie. She says she's your sister." I felt a wave of anger wash over me, followed by curiosity. What could Melanie possibly want after all this time? "Tell her to wait," I said. I'll be there in a minute. I grabbed my keys and drove down to the gate. When I saw her standing there, I barely recognized her. Melanie had always been immaculate. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, that smug smile that made me want to scream. But the woman standing at my gate looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were plain, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Behind her stood my mother and my father, both looking older and worn down. My father avoided my gaze, but my mother stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Was it shame? Regret? I rolled down my window but didn't get out of the car. What do you want? Melanie stepped forward, her voice cautious. Bethany, we need to talk. Can we come in? No, I said flatly. Say what you need to say from there. Melanie glanced at our mother, then back at me. We've been going through a hard time. Gregory's business failed and we lost our house. Mom and Dad have been helping us, but they can't anymore. We heard you were doing well and we thought... You thought you could come here and ask for help? I interrupted, my voice cold. Melanie's face flushed. We're family, Bethany. You don't need all this space. We could move in, just until we get back on our feet. I stared at her in disbelief. They had the audacity to show up after 6 years and ask to move into my home, the home I had built without them, the home they didn't even know existed until now. I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and made one call. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Hello, this is Patricia. I smiled, even though my hands were shaking. Patricia, it's Bethany. I need your advice on something. Patricia had been more than a mentor to me. She was the closest thing I had to family. After she retired, we stayed in touch, and she continued to offer guidance whenever I needed it. She knew about my past, about the divorce, about my family turning their backs on me, and she knew how hard I had worked to get where I was. What's going on? Patricia asked, her voice warm and reassuring. My family just showed up at my gate, I said, keeping my voice steady. They want to move in with me. My sister lost everything, and they think I owe them help. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Patricia said, Bethany, you don't owe them anything. You know that, right? I do, I said, but I want to handle this the right way. I don't want to just slam the door in their faces. I want them to understand why I'm saying no. Patricia chuckled softly. Then tell them the truth. Remind them of what they said to you 6 years ago. And if they still don't get it, walk away. You've earned the right to protect your peace. I thanked Patricia and hung up. Then I turned back to my family, who were still standing at the gate, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. You want to talk about family, I said, my voice calm but firm. Let's talk about family. Melanie opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. 6 years ago, I called Mom and begged for help. Do you remember what she said to me? My mother looked down at the ground, her face pale. Melanie shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't answer. She told me I made my bed and I should lie in it, I continued. You laughed at me, Melanie. You told me to get a second job. And Dad, you didn't say a word. You just stood by and let them humiliate me. My father finally looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret. Bethany, we didn't know how bad things were. You didn't care, I interrupted. You didn't care because it was easier to write me off than to help me. And now, 6 years later, you show up here asking for the same thing I asked for back then. Do you see the irony? Melanie's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Bethany, we're sorry. We made a mistake, but we're desperate. We need your help. I was desperate too, I said, but I figured it out on my own. I worked 2 jobs, went back to school, and built a business from nothing. I didn't have anyone to lean on, and I didn't have a safety net, but I survived, and I thrived. My mother stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We're proud of you, Bethany. We really are. But we're asking you to be the bigger person here. Family is supposed to help each other." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family is supposed to help each other? Where was that philosophy 6 years ago? Where were you when I was sleeping on a friend's couch because I couldn't afford rent? Where were you when I was eating cereal for dinner because I didn't have money for groceries? No one answered. "I'll tell you where you were," I said. "You were sitting in your comfortable homes, judging me for my mistakes and congratulating yourselves for not being in my shoes. Well, guess what? Now you are." Melanie wiped her eyes and took a step back. "So, that's it? You're just going to turn us away?" "Yes," I said simply. "I'm going to turn you away, because I don't owe you anything. You had your chance to be there for me, and you chose not to. Now I'm choosing not to be there for you." My father finally spoke, his voice quiet. "What are we supposed to do, Bethany?" "The same thing I did," I said. "Figure it out. Get a second job, downsize, do whatever it takes. You'll survive, just like I did." I turned to walk back to my car, but my mother called after me. "Bethany, please, don't do this. We're family." I stopped and looked back at her. Family doesn't laugh at you when you're drowning. Family doesn't turn their backs on you when you need them most. You taught me that lesson 6 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. Without another word, I got into my car and drove back up to the house. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see their faces or hear their pleas. I had said what I needed to say, and now it was over. When I got inside, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down in my living room. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for turning them away, but a larger part of me felt relieved that I had finally stood up for myself, relieved that I didn't let them guilt me into something I didn't want to do. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who begged for help and cried herself to sleep. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way that the only person you can rely on is yourself. As I sat there, I realized something important. My family hadn't come to my gate because they loved me or because they wanted to reconnect. They came because they needed something from me, and when I said no, they would walk away just as easily as they had 6 years ago. But this time, I didn't care. I had built a life I was proud of, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me, not even the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since my family had reappeared, I felt like I could breathe. I had said what needed to be said, and I had stood my ground. That should have been the end of it. But of course it wasn't. I was in my home office reviewing contracts for a new client when my phone started buzzing. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. Then another call came through, and another. By the time the 5th call came in, I realized something was happening. I answered the next one, keeping my voice professional. "This is Bethany." "Hi, is this the Bethany who owns the consulting business?" a woman asked, her tone uncertain. "Yes, this is she. How can I help you?" "I'm calling from the Kansas City Journal. We received a tip that you recently turned away your family members who were in financial distress. Is that true?" My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, what?" "We're running a story about successful business people and their relationships with family members who are struggling. Your name came up. Would you like to comment?" I felt heat rise to my face. "No comment," I said, and hung up immediately. Within minutes, my phone was flooded with calls from reporters, bloggers, and even a few local television stations. I turned off my phone and sat in stunned silence. How had this happened? How had my private family matter become public knowledge? The answer came an hour later, when my assistant forwarded me a link to a social media post. It was from Melanie. The post featured a photo of my gate, the same gate where we had stood the day before. The caption read, "Sometimes success changes people. My sister has more money and space than she could ever need, but when our family fell on hard times, she turned us away without a second thought." I guess blood doesn't mean much when you're living in a mansion. The post had already been shared hundreds of times, and the comments were vicious. People I had never met were calling me selfish, heartless, and cruel. Some even suggested that my success must have come from stepping on others. A few comments defended me, but they were drowned out by the outrage. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with anger. Melanie had weaponized social media to paint me as the villain, knowing full well that people would rally to her side without knowing the full story. She had turned my private decision into a public spectacle. And now I was being judged by strangers who knew nothing about what I had been through. I wanted to respond. I wanted to post my own side of the story, to tell the world about the phone call 6 years ago, about the way my family had abandoned me when I needed them most. But something stopped me. Engaging with Melanie's post would only add fuel to the fire. It would turn this into a back-and-forth battle that I had no interest in fighting. Instead, I called Patricia again. "I saw the post," Patricia said before I could even speak. "Bethany, I'm so sorry. This is beyond inappropriate." "She's trying to destroy my reputation," I said, my voice tight. "She's making it look like I'm some heartless monster who abandoned my family." "Then you need to protect yourself," Patricia said firmly. "This isn't just about personal feelings anymore. This could affect your business. You need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." "How?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "First, document everything. If you have records of that phone call from 6 years ago, find them. If you have any proof of how your family treated you, gather it. Second, hire a lawyer. Melanie's post could be considered defamation if it's damaging your reputation. And third, consider releasing a statement, not to engage with her, but to set the record straight on your own terms." I took a deep breath and nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Okay, I'll do that. And Bethany," Patricia added, "don't let this break you. You've come too far to let them drag you down now." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the day following Patricia's advice. I dug through old files and found bank statements from the year of my divorce, showing the debts Ralph had left me with. I also found text messages from that time period, messages where I had asked my mother for help and received only cold, dismissive responses. I contacted a lawyer named Gregory, ironically the same name as Melanie's husband, and explained the situation. He reviewed Melanie's post and confirmed that it could be considered defamatory, especially since it implied I had done something morally wrong without providing full context. "You have a strong case," Gregory said. "But I want you to think carefully about whether you want to pursue this. Legal action can be expensive and emotionally draining. Sometimes the best move is to ignore it and let it blow over." "I don't want to ignore it," I said. "I want people to know the truth." "Then let's draft a statement," Gregory suggested. "Something factual and professional. We'll post it on your business page and send it to any media outlets that contact you. Let the facts speak for themselves." That night, Gregory and I worked together to craft a statement. It was simple and direct. 6 years ago, I went through a difficult divorce that left me in financial ruin. When I asked my family for help, I was told to figure it out on my own. I did exactly that. I worked multiple jobs, went back to school, and built a business from the ground up. Recently, my family reached out asking for financial support and housing. I declined, not out of malice, but because I believe they are capable of overcoming their challenges just as I overcame mine. I wish them well, but I will not be publicly shamed for setting boundaries. The statement went live the next morning, and the response was immediate. Some people continued to criticize me, but many others began to see my side. Comments flooded in from people who had been in similar situations, people who had been hurt by family members and struggled with the guilt of saying no. But what surprised me most was the silence from Melanie. She didn't respond to my statement. She didn't post another update. It was as if she had expected me to crumble under the pressure, and when I didn't, she ran out of ammunition. For a few days, I thought that was the end of it. The media attention faded, and life started to return to normal. My business continued to thrive, and I focused on the work I loved. But then I received a call that changed everything. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, but this time I answered. "Is this Bethany?" A man's voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Thomas. I'm a lawyer representing your mother and sister." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you want?" "My clients believe they have a legal claim to a portion of your assets," Thomas said, his tone professional but firm. "Specifically, they're arguing that your mother provided financial support during your marriage to Ralph, and that support constitutes a loan that was never repaid." I almost laughed. "Are you serious?" My mother didn't give me any financial support during my marriage. She paid for my wedding, which was her choice, and she made it very clear at the time that it was a gift, not a loan. "Do you have documentation proving it was a gift?" Thomas asked. I hesitated. "I don't think so. It was 6 years ago, and we didn't exactly draw up a contract." "Then you can see why my clients feel they have a case," Thomas said. "They're prepared to file a lawsuit, unless you agree to settle this matter privately." "A settlement?" I repeated, incredulous. "What are they asking for?" $200,000, Thomas said. "They believe that amount reflects the financial support they provided, plus interest." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. $200,000. That was more than my mother had ever spent on my wedding, and we both knew it. This wasn't about repaying a loan. This was about punishing me for saying no. "Tell your clients to go ahead and file the lawsuit," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Because I'm not giving them a single cent." I hung up before Thomas could respond. My hands were trembling, and I felt tears of frustration prick my eyes. How could they do this? How could they twist something that had happened 6 years ago into a legal weapon? I called Gregory immediately and told him what had happened. He listened carefully, then said, "Bethany, this is a shakedown. They're hoping you'll pay them just to make this go away. But if you stand your ground, I don't think they have a strong case." "What if they do file?" I asked. "Then we fight it," Gregory said. "We'll argue that the wedding expenses were a gift, not a loan. We'll also bring up the fact that your mother explicitly told you she wouldn't help you during your divorce. That contradicts the idea that she was acting as your lender." "I just can't believe they would go this far," I said quietly. "Unfortunately, desperation makes people do terrible things," Gregory replied. "But you're not alone in this. We'll handle it together." Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work, but the threat of a lawsuit hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't stop thinking about how my family had twisted our history to suit their narrative. The wedding had been their idea. They had insisted on the expensive venue, the extravagant flowers, the open bar, and now they were claiming it was a loan I owed them? A week later, the lawsuit was officially filed. When Gregory forwarded me the documents, I read through them with a mix of disbelief and rage. The lawsuit claimed that my mother had provided significant financial support throughout my adult life, and that I had failed to honor my obligations by refusing to help when they needed it. It was all lies. My mother had never supported me financially beyond the wedding. She had made it clear that I was on my own, and I had accepted that. Now, she was rewriting history to make herself look like a victim. But what made it worse was the timing. My business was at a critical point. We were negotiating a major contract with a national retailer, and the last thing I needed was negative publicity. If word got out that I was being sued by my own family, it could damage my reputation and cost me the deal. I met with Gregory to discuss our strategy. We need to be aggressive, he said. We'll file a motion to dismiss, arguing that their claims have no legal merit. We'll also depose your mother and sister to put their version of events on the record. If they're lying, it'll become clear very quickly. What if they're not lying? I asked. What if they actually believe their own version of events? Gregory gave me a sympathetic look. Then we'll prove them wrong with the facts. Trust me, Bethany. You have the stronger case. But as the lawsuit dragged on, I started to doubt myself. My family's lawyer was relentless, digging into every aspect of my finances and personal life. They subpoenaed records from my business, my bank accounts, even my old landlord from the apartment I had rented after my divorce. The worst part was the deposition. I had to sit in a conference room while Thomas grilled me for hours, asking questions designed to make me look selfish and ungrateful. He asked about my income, my properties, my lifestyle. He asked why I hadn't reached out to my family after my business became successful. He even asked if I felt guilty for having more than they did. I answered every question as honestly as I could, but by the end of the day I felt exhausted and demoralized. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was an emotional one. My family was trying to tear me down, and they were willing to lie and manipulate to do it. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the fireplace. I thought about everything I had been through, the divorce, the debt, the years of struggling to rebuild my life. I had survived all of that, and I had come out stronger. But this felt different. This felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything Ralph or my family had ever done before. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Claire, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Claire had been a friend of my mother's, and she had witnessed firsthand how my family treated me growing up. "Bethany," Claire said, her voice hesitant. "I heard about the lawsuit. I wanted you to know something. I don't think your mother is being honest about the wedding expenses." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I was there when your mother and father were planning it," Claire said. "They didn't pay for everything. Ralph's parents contributed half the cost. Your mother is lying about how much she actually spent." I felt the ground shift beneath me. If what Claire was saying was true, then my mother's entire case was built on a lie. "Can you testify to that?" I asked. "Yes," Claire said. "I'll do whatever you need." With Claire's testimony, the entire landscape of the lawsuit shifted. Gregory moved quickly, filing a motion to compel my mother to produce financial records from the time of my wedding. If she couldn't prove she had paid the full amount she was claiming, her case would collapse. But my mother's lawyer fought back hard. They argued that Claire's testimony was unreliable because she hadn't been directly involved in the financial transactions. They also tried to paint me as vindictive, claiming I was harassing my family by dragging the lawsuit out. The judge wasn't convinced. During a hearing, he ordered my mother to provide bank statements and receipts showing exactly how much she had spent on the wedding. If she couldn't produce the documents, he would dismiss the case. That should have been my victory. But then, something unexpected happened. 2 days after the hearing, I received a frantic call from Melanie. Her voice was panicked, almost hysterical. "Bethany, please, we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," I replied coldly. "Just listen to me for 1 minute," Melanie begged. "Mom is losing it. She can't find the receipts. She's been tearing the house apart looking for them, but they're not there. I think she threw them away years ago." "That's not my problem," I said. "Bethany, please," Melanie said, her voice breaking. "If we lose this case, we're going to be destroyed. The lawyer fees alone are going to bankrupt us. Mom and Dad have already spent their savings on this. If we lose, we'll have nothing." I felt a flicker of something. Pity, maybe, or satisfaction. But I pushed it down. "You should have thought about that before you filed a frivolous lawsuit." "I know we've been awful to you," Melanie said, sobbing now. "I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, just drop the case. We'll drop ours too." We'll leave you alone forever. Just don't make us go through with this." "Why should I?" I asked. "You came after me, Melanie. You tried to ruin my reputation and take my money. Why should I show you mercy when you showed me none?" "Because we're family," Melanie whispered. I laughed bitterly. Family doesn't sue each other. Family doesn't lie about financial support. Family doesn't drag each other through the mud for money. You stopped being my family a long time ago. I hung up, and this time, I blocked Melanie's number. I didn't want to hear from her again. I didn't want to hear from any of them. A week later, the court date arrived. Gregory and I sat on one side of the courtroom, and my mother, father, and Melanie sat on the other with their lawyer. My mother looked pale and drawn, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder of incomplete documents. The judge reviewed the evidence, or lack thereof, and then turned to my mother. "Do you have proof of the expenses you're claiming?" My mother hesitated. "Your Honor, I know I paid for the wedding. I remember writing the checks, but I can't find the receipts." "That's not good enough," the judge said. "Without documentation, I have no way of verifying your claims. Furthermore, the testimony from Miss Clare indicates that the expenses were split between both families. Based on the evidence presented, I'm dismissing this case. The plaintiff will be responsible for all court costs and attorney fees." My mother's face crumbled. My father put his head in his hands. Melanie just stared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. But I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no joy, just emptiness. As we walked out of the courthouse, Gregory turned to me and smiled. "You won, Bethany. It's over." "It doesn't feel like a win," I said quietly. "That's because you're a good person," Gregory replied. "But don't let that guilt you into thinking you made the wrong choice. You stood up for yourself, and you won." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished. My family had tried to destroy me, and I had fought back. But at what cost? That night, I sat alone in my house and thought about the last 6 years. I had built a life I was proud of, but I had also lost something along the way. My family, my sense of belonging, the hope that things could ever be repaired. And then, just as I was starting to accept that it was truly over, I received one final message. It was an email from my father. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was short. "Bethany, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I stood by and let your mother and sister treat you terribly, both 6 years ago and now. I was a coward, and I'm ashamed of that. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to ever speak to me again. But I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You deserved better from us, and I'm sorry we failed you. Your father." I read the email 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion: anger, sadness, confusion. My father had never stood up for me. He had watched as my mother and sister tore me down, and he had said nothing. And now, after everything, he wanted to apologize. I thought about responding. I thought about telling him exactly how much his silence had hurt me, how his refusal to defend me had shaped the person I became. But in the end, I didn't. I closed the email and moved it to a folder I would probably never open again. Some wounds run too deep to heal, and some apologies come too late to matter. But as I sat there in the quiet of my home, I realized something important. I didn't need my father's apology. I didn't need my mother's regret, or Melanie's tears. I had already won the only battle that mattered, the battle for my own peace of mind. They had tried to break me, and they had failed. I had built a life without them, and I would continue to live it on my own terms. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The lawsuit was over. My family was gone. And I was finally truly free. 3 months after the lawsuit was dismissed, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My assistant buzzed me during a meeting with a new client. "Bethany, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Her name is Claire." I excused myself and went to the lobby, where Claire was waiting. She looked worried, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Claire, what's wrong?" I asked, leading her to my private office. She sat down and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something. After the trial, your mother came to see me. She was furious that I testified against her. She told me I had ruined her life and that she would never forgive me." "I'm sorry she dragged you into this," I said. "That's not why I'm here," Claire continued. "A few weeks ago, I ran into Melanie at the grocery store. She looked terrible, exhausted, stressed. She started talking to me, and I think she was desperate for someone to listen. She told me something that I think you need to know." I leaned forward. "What did she say?" "She told me that your mother never actually planned to use the lawsuit money for their debts," Claire said. "Melanie said the whole lawsuit was about punishing you. Your mother was humiliated when you posted that statement online, and she wanted to make you suffer. The lawsuit was revenge, pure and simple." I felt anger rise in my chest, but I wasn't surprised. Deep down, I had suspected as much. "Did Melanie say anything else?" "Yes," Claire said. "She told me that Gregory, her husband, didn't actually lose his business because of market conditions. He lost it because he was embezzling money from his clients. He's under investigation, and Melanie is terrified they're going to lose everything. She said she regrets ever going along with your mother's plan because now they're in an even worse position than before." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. My family's financial collapse wasn't just bad luck. It was the result of their own poor choices and illegal behavior. And instead of taking responsibility, they had tried to drag me down with them. "Thank you for telling me," I said to Claire. She stood up to leave, then hesitated. "Bethany, I know this is none of my business, but I think you should know that your mother is still talking about you. She tells anyone who will listen that you're a selfish daughter who abandoned her family. She's trying to turn people against you." "Let her," I said calmly. "The people who matter know the truth." After Claire left, I sat alone in my office and thought about what she had told me. My mother was still trying to destroy my reputation, even after losing the lawsuit. She couldn't accept that I had moved on without her. But I realized something important in that moment. My mother's opinion of me no longer mattered. For years, I had carried the weight of her disapproval, always wondering if I was good enough, always trying to prove myself. But now, I was free from that burden. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her love. I had built a life I was proud of, and nothing she said could take that away from me. That afternoon, I received another unexpected call. This one was from a journalist named Jessica, who had been following my story since the social media post. "Bethany, I'm writing a feature about family estrangement and financial independence. I'd love to interview you about your experience. I think your story could help a lot of people who are struggling with similar situations." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to let the whole thing fade away. But another part of me realized that sharing my story might actually do some good. "I'll do it," I said. "But I want to make sure the focus is on resilience and moving forward, not on tearing my family down." "Absolutely," Jessica agreed. The interview took place a week later in my office. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my divorce, my family's rejection, and how I had rebuilt my life from scratch. She asked about the lawsuit and how it had affected me emotionally. "The hardest part wasn't the legal battle," I told her. "It was realizing that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally were willing to destroy me for money. That was the real betrayal." "How did you find the strength to keep going?" Jessica asked. "I stopped waiting for permission to be happy," I said. I stopped waiting for my family to validate my choices or my success. I realized that the only person who could give me peace was myself. The article was published 2 weeks later, and the response was overwhelming. I received messages from hundreds of people who had been through similar situations, people who had been rejected by their families, people who had been sued by relatives, people who had been told they weren't good enough. Many of them thanked me for speaking out. They said my story gave them hope that they could survive their own family trauma and build something better. But the message that affected me most came from a woman named Jennifer. She wrote, "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to walk away. I've been supporting my family financially for years, and they treat me terribly. Your story gave me the courage to say no. I'm finally putting myself first." Reading that message, I realized that my pain had purpose. By sharing my story, I had helped someone else find their strength. 6 months after the article was published, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs. The event was held in downtown Kansas City, and the ballroom was packed with ambitious, driven women who had overcome their own obstacles to build successful businesses. As I stood backstage waiting for my turn to speak, I felt nervous, but excited. This was a new chapter for me, one where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was inspiring others to rebuild theirs. When I walked onto the stage, the audience applauded. I looked out at the sea of faces and saw so many women who reminded me of myself. Women who had been told they couldn't succeed. Women who had been underestimated. Women who had proven everyone wrong. I began my speech by telling them about the phone call 6 years ago, the one where my mother had laughed at my desperation. I told them about working 2 jobs, going back to school, and starting my business with nothing but determination and a borrowed laptop. "The people who doubted me thought I would fail," I said. "They thought I was weak, incapable, and destined for mediocrity. But I proved them wrong, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to prove something to myself, that I was worth more than their judgment." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. When my family came back asking for help, I had a choice, I continued. I could have been the bigger person and let them move in. I could have written them a check and bought their silence, but I didn't. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say no. Sometimes protecting your peace is more important than keeping the peace. The applause was thunderous. After my speech, dozens of women came up to me, sharing their own stories of family rejection and resilience. Some of them cried as they thanked me for giving them permission to prioritize themselves. One woman, a business owner named Patricia, not the Patricia who had mentored me, but a different Patricia, told me that her parents had disowned her when she refused to give them money for a failed business venture. "I felt so guilty," she said. "But hearing your story made me realize I didn't do anything wrong." They did. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. My pain had transformed into purpose. My story was helping others find their own strength, but the universe wasn't done with me yet. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was my mother's. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page, handwritten in my mother's shaky cursive. "Bethany, I am writing to inform you that your father has been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The doctors say he has 6 months to live, maybe less. He wants to see you before he dies. I know you have no reason to come, but I'm asking you anyway. He regrets how things ended between you, and he wants a chance to make peace. Your mother." I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me felt sympathy for my father. He had always been the quieter one, the one who stood in the background while my mother made all the decisions. But another part of me felt nothing but anger. He had stood by and let my mother and sister treat me horribly. He had never once defended me. And now, on his deathbed, he wanted forgiveness, I called Gregory, my lawyer, and asked for his advice. "This isn't a legal question," he said. "This is a personal one. Only you can decide if you want to see him." "I don't know if I do," I admitted. "Then don't go," Gregory said. "You don't owe him anything, Bethany. Not even a goodbye." But Patricia, my mentor, had a different perspective. When I told her about the letter, she said, "Bethany, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will say this. Regret is a heavy burden to carry. If you think you'll regret not saying goodbye, then go. But if you think seeing him will just reopen old wounds, then stay away. Either way, make the choice that protects your peace." I thought about it for days. I imagined walking into my parents' house, seeing my father in a hospital bed, hearing my mother hover nearby with her judgmental stare. I imagined what I would say to him, what he would say to me. And then I realized something important. I didn't need closure from my father. I had already found closure on my own. I wrote a short response and mailed it back. "I wish you peace in your final days, but I won't be visiting. You had years to make things right, and you chose not to. I've moved on, and I hope you find a way to make peace with your choices. Bethany." It was honest, direct, and final, and when I dropped it in the mailbox, I felt no guilt, only relief. 2 months later, I received a phone call from Melanie. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Bethany, Dad died last night," she said, her voice hollow. "I'm sorry for your loss," I replied, my tone neutral. "There's going to be a funeral on Saturday. I wanted to let you know, in case you want to come." "I won't be there," I said. There was a long pause. Then Melanie said quietly, "I understand. I just thought you should know." "Thank you for telling me," I said, and hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt nothing, and that surprised me. I had spent so many years being angry at my father for his silence, for his failure to protect me. But now that he was gone, I felt only emptiness. A few days after the funeral, Claire called me again. "I went to the service," she said. "I thought you'd want to know what happened." "I'm listening," I said. "It was small, just your mother, Melanie, and a few distant relatives. Your mother gave a eulogy and talked about what a good man your father was. She didn't mention you once, Bethany. It was like you didn't exist." I wasn't surprised. "How did Melanie seem?" "Lost," Claire said. "She cried the whole time. And after the service, I overheard her and your mother arguing. Melanie was saying something about not being able to afford the funeral expenses. Your mother snapped at her and said it was Melanie's fault for marrying a criminal." "Gregory?" I asked. "Yes. Apparently he was formally charged with embezzlement last week. Melanie is facing the possibility of losing everything: her house, her savings, even her reputation. People in town are calling her the wife of a con man. I should have felt satisfaction hearing this, but instead, I just felt tired. My family's downfall was complete, but it brought me no joy. They had destroyed themselves through their own greed and poor choices, and I had nothing to do with it." "Thank you for letting me know, Claire," I said. "There's one more thing," Claire added. "Your mother asked about you at the funeral. She asked me if I knew how you were doing. I told her you were thriving. She didn't say anything, but I saw her face. She looked defeated. After hanging up, I sat in my living room and reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. My family had tried to destroy me, and they had failed. But in their failure, they had destroyed themselves instead. Melanie was married to a criminal and facing financial ruin. My mother had lost her husband and was alone in a house she could barely afford. My father was gone, having never made peace with the damage he had allowed to happen. And me? I was thriving. My business was more successful than ever. I had been invited to speak at conferences across the country. I had helped countless women find the courage to set boundaries and prioritize their own well-being. I thought about the woman I had been 6 years ago, the one who had begged for help and been told to figure it out on her own. That woman would have been terrified of the journey ahead, but she wouldn't have believed how strong she would become. In the months that followed, I heard through Claire that my mother had sold her house and moved into a small apartment. Melanie's husband was sentenced to 5 years in prison for embezzlement, and she was forced to take a job as a cashier to make ends meet. The same people who had once admired her wealth and status now gossiped about her downfall. My mother, bitter and isolated, spent her days alone, estranged from the daughter she had driven away, and burdened by the consequences of her own cruelty. They had gambled everything on tearing me down, and in the end, they had lost everything: their reputation, their stability, and any chance of reconciliation. The karma they created had come full circle, and there was no one left to blame but themselves. As for me, I stood on the balcony of my home one evening, watching the sun set over the trees, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: genuine peace. I had built a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. My family had tried to break me, to shame me, to force me back into the role of the forgotten daughter who owed them everything. But I had refused. I had said no when it mattered most, and in doing so, I had saved myself. The journey had been painful, the battles exhausting. But standing here now, free and whole, I knew one thing for certain. Revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about refusing to let them win. And I had won in every way that mattered.